Hi, Adam here. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about First Peter and how it really resonates a lot with my life. For a long time growing up, I always sought to find my identity in something else. I would hang out with the wrong crowd, or I would try to wear a certain type of clothing that would get me accepted. I would try to drive a certain type of car. I was always trying to find ways to feel like I fit in, like I belonged to something bigger. Um, and I often chose very poor ways of trying to do that. Eventually, that led me into a drug addiction. And after my drug addiction and through the course of my drug addiction getting worse and worse, it eventually led me to prison. And so the whole exile motif really resonates with me about being pulled out of the world and placed in this place of suffering. Admittedly, First Peter is talking about suffering for righteousness' sake. In fact, that's the whole point. These people in Asia Minor had done nothing wrong. They had done everything right, yet they were still being persecuted. But nevertheless, I still find some parallels between their plight and mine at that point in my life, even though they were for very different reasons. When I was locked up, there was, well, let me start a little bit further back. Prior to my being incarcerated, prior to my conversion, I was a neo atheist. I was militantly opposed to Christianity, militantly opposed to faith of any kind, at least organized religion. Indeed, I believe that there was a such thing as truth and of morality, and I believe that I had it all, that I knew it, and I was the ground for any discussion about what was right or what was wrong, and that religion was only bad. So you can imagine my surprise when I woke up in prison one day and realized that I was a Christian, that I had been born again, and that God had changed my heart, had given me a heart of flesh and taken out my heart of stone. And so there's a lot of things in First Peter that I can relate to, especially as it talks about being transferred from one kingdom to the next. So if you remember, I talked about my trying to find my identity in all the wrong places, about my winding up in prison and that being sort of an exile experience for me, because for the vast majority of my time being incarcerated, I was a Christian. And so I was suffering, certainly for my own for the consequences of my own actions. But I still have an understanding of what I think I understand a little bit of what the people that Peter is writing to were going through. One of my favorite passages in this book is in verse 9 and 10. It says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you have not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." And so you can see all that time that I was searching to find my identity in something else, it turns out that God gave me that identity. That identity that I was searching for was one of his, part of his priesthood, someone who was chosen. And when I look back on the other passages in Peter, like in the first chapter, where it talks about us being predestined, about us being chosen from the beginning, but from before time, as part of God's grand plan, his eternal purpose. It's just amazing to me that God called me and transferred me out of this kingdom into his. That whole exile idea, furthermore, is really accentuated in this whole idea in that while I was part of the kingdom of darkness, I was I was at home. I wasn't in exile. I was living in the kingdom in which I belonged, the kingdom of the prince of the power of the air. It was only when God pulled me out from that kingdom and transferred me to his kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, which I believe at this point is in heaven and is on earth insofar as it's dwelling within us and our recognition of God's rule. We became exiles. So the kingdom's in heaven. We are away from that kingdom for the moment. And so now we are citizens and sojourners of citizens of another country, sojourning in this kingdom here. And so I think there's really important ideas that lend particularly to the idea of hope about enduring suffering here on this earth. You know, as I look around this world, as I watch the news, I just get more and more, not even perplexed, disappointed, amazed, grieved at the direction that our country and our world indeed is going. And so I have to remind myself every day that this world is not my home, that the things that are going on now have always been, that things have already been established that they're going to go this way. You know, Paul talks about to Timothy, talking about how in the end things are going to get worse. And we can see it in Revelation and through various things. So we can expect things to get worse and worse as time goes on. But still, there's a part of me that just doesn't want to deal with it. It's like I have so much stuff going on in my life, and there's so much more complications being added by the way the culture is going and all these things. It's really hard to focus on the fact that we have an eternal place with Christ. But indeed, it's the truth. And that is our hope. And that is what is supposed to give me the ability and give me the basis upon which to endure here on earth. While I'm suffering through the ramifications of being a Christian in the United States, where it's becoming more and more difficult to freely speak about our faith, where we're being attacked on all sides. And so to remember that there is an eternal perspective, that Christ is coming, that I will be at home with him to inherit the inheritance that he promised me, that's unperishing, unfading, undefiled, that will be mine forever with him in eternity. It does lend to that whole idea of I can do this now because I'll have that then. I talked about in the beginning my drug addiction, and part of being an addict is about not being able to withhold pleasure, to hold off, to kind of see that, if I suffer a little bit now, it'll be greater in the end. Addicts don't think like that. Addicts think like, I need everything I can have right now, and I'll worry about then. And so you can see that there's often, you can imagine how life is difficult for people who are stuck in the throes of addiction. And so it's a little bit different now that I'm out of that, and now that I've been saved, to have the heart and the mindset of I can suffer now because there's going to be a greater good then. I can suffer now because there is a hope, and that hope is laid up for me in heaven, that hope of final and perfect restoration, that perfect shalom that the Jews like to talk about, that perfect peace and serenity where everything is made whole and there's no more strife and no more suffering. So it's to that day that I look forward to. Thank you very much.